I still remember that morning as if it were etched into the folds of my memory, each detail sharpened by a strange mix of anticipation, anxiety, and that familiar bittersweet ache of longing. I clutched the small white envelopes I had carefully prepared, one for each family member, my hands trembling slightly despite my attempts to remain composed. I had spent the past year saving, scrimping, and planning, determined to make this Christmas meaningful, not through extravagant displays, but by giving something that truly mattered, something that would last beyond the glitter and the ribbons. My heart thumped against my ribcage as I stepped into the room, trying to mask my nervousness with a calm smile. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice a little higher than usual, carrying a hint of the excitement I could hardly contain. Sharon was the first to notice me, her eyes narrowing with curiosity, quickly followed by that infuriating sparkle of judgment I had learned to recognize all too well. Derek, Marcus, Vanessa, and Bob, all eyes on me. And there it was, that invisible weight of expectation, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What has Linda prepared this year? I began handing out the envelopes, one by one, my fingers brushing theirs, noticing the subtle expressions before the words even came out. Sharon tore hers open first, her laughter erupting like a sharp bell, piercing through the warm holiday atmosphere. "Mom, this is serious? A printed certificate? Really? You can't even give a proper gift," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, her lips curling into that familiar smirk I had seen countless times. I froze for a heartbeat, then swallowed, forcing a calm reply, my voice steady despite the sting of hurt. "Keep it, Sharon. You might find it more useful than you realize." Derek leaned over her shoulder, chuckling with that smirk of his own, his voice teasing, almost cruel. "Looks like one of those internet scams, Linda. Did you fall for something online?" Marcus shook his head slowly, his eyes soft but tinged with disappointment. "Mom, we said you didn't need to get us anything, but if you were going to, maybe something practical? Something that actually matters?" Vanessa whispered something to Marcus, and I caught the corner of her smile, a shadow of amusement dancing in their eyes. I felt a tight knot of frustration and sorrow coil in my stomach, my chest tightening with the weight of years of unnoticed effort, of unappreciated care. Bob, my steadfast brother, leaned forward, his voice firm and low, the one voice in the room that seemed to carry understanding. "You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what these gifts really are." Sharon rolled her eyes at him, her voice sharp, dismissive. "Uncle Bob, with all due respect, Mum could have chosen better. We gave her real presents after all." I stood slowly, feeling the air shift as I drew myself to my full height, the years of endurance and quiet disappointment tightening into a resolve I hadn't dared summon until now. My hands lifted the remaining envelopes, and I looked each of them in the eye, letting the silence stretch, heavy with the weight of my presence. "Hold on to these," I said, my voice calm, deliberate, yet carrying the tremor of emotion beneath. "You're going to want them soon enough." And then I walked out. The room fell into a confused hush, the laughter dying abruptly, replaced by the muffled thump of uncertainty. Bob remained behind, clutching an envelope identical to the ones I had given the others, his face serious, somber, as though he understood some hidden truth the rest of the family could not yet grasp. "You have no idea what you just refused," he said quietly, his words lingering in the air long after I had left. Outside, I paused by the door, the chill of Portland winter brushing against my cheeks, and I let myself breathe deeply, the weight of anticipation mixed with relief. The first step had been taken. The next chapters of this story, the truths, the lessons, the reckoning, were waiting, quietly, in the months to come. But for now, all I could feel was the strange, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, this Christmas could change everything. June in Portland carries a peculiar kind of light. Soft, diffused through the persistent morning mist, turning even the mundane streets into a watercolor of muted greens and grays. That morning, I found myself walking into the familiar sterile scent of the cardiologist's office, my hands wrapped around the straps of my handbag a little too tightly, knuckles pale. The receptionist smiled at me with polite indifference, and I returned a nod that was far too weak to convey the storm brewing inside. Sitting in the waiting room, I tried to focus on the magazines scattered across the coffee table, flipping mechanically through pages I didn't read. The distant murmur of other patients, the faint squeak of rubber soles against linoleum, even the subtle hum of fluorescent lights overhead seemed to echo my heartbeat in a way that was almost mocking. Every beat of my heart that morning carried with it a strange mixture of fear and guilt. Fear for my own mortality and guilt for imagining, even for a second, that my children, Sharon and Marcus, might not notice if I faltered. When the doctor finally called my name, I followed him into the examination room, the paper crinkling beneath me as I sat on the narrow exam table. His expression was calm, professional, but there was a tension in his eyes that I immediately recognized, the kind that precedes bad news. "Linda," he began, and I braced myself. "Your tests indicate that you need cardiac surgery. It's urgent, and without it, your condition could worsen quickly." The words landed on me like a sudden gust of icy wind. Cardiac surgery. Urgent. Worsen quickly. My mind swirled, a chaotic storm of disbelief and panic. How serious?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Moderate to high risk, but treatable," he said, his tone measured. "The estimated cost is $85,000. With your insurance, it covers roughly half. You would need to cover about $40,000 out of pocket." My chest tightened, not from the condition, but from the crushing weight of reality. $40,000. I had spent years scrimping, saving for modest comforts, for occasional trips, for small joys with my family. $40,000 was a mountain I could not climb alone. I nodded slowly, forcing a calm I did not feel. That evening, I dialed Sharon's number, my hands trembling. "Darling, I need to talk to you about something serious." My voice was careful, gentle, the kind you use when trying to protect someone else from shock, even as you're collapsing inside. "Mom, I'm in the middle of a meeting." Sharon's voice sounded distant, clipped. "Can I call you later?" I swallowed, my throat tight, holding back the urge to cry. "Of course, whenever you can." Hours, days passed. I waited for her return call, and waited and waited. It never came. I tried Marcus next, my hope dimming, but not extinguished. "Son, do you have a minute?" "Mom, I'm taking the kids to soccer practice," he said breezily, almost as if reading from a script. "Send me a message." I hung up, staring at the phone as if it had betrayed me. I felt the familiar ache of invisibility, of being present, yet unseen, caring, yet unconsidered. I wondered, not for the first time, if I was already invisible to the people I loved most. Frustration and fear twisted together until I could no longer bear them in silence. I met Grace at our usual cafe, the one tucked between an old bookstore and a florist shop. The air smelled of roasted coffee beans and sugar, warm and comforting, a small refuge from the storm of my own thoughts. "Grace," I said, voice tight, eyes welling up. "I don't know what to do. They just don't. I can't get them to listen. I feel like a burden already." Grace reached across the table, her hand warm and grounding on mine. "Linda, you need to tell them. It's serious. They can't help you if they don't even know." "I don't want to be a burden," I whispered, staring at the ripples in my coffee cup. "They have their own lives, their families, their work. I can't." "Linda, stop." Grace's voice was firm, soft yet insistent. "You are not a burden. You are human, and the people who love you will want to be there. You have to let them in." Her words lingered in the air like incense, warming yet stinging. I wanted to believe them, wanted to reach out, wanted to demand attention, But the old habits, politeness, self-sacrifice, fear of imposing, kept me silent. 2 days later, as I checked the mailbox, a letter caught my eye. A thick, official envelope, its red stamp screaming urgency. My fingers trembled as I opened it, heart sinking before I even read a word. It was a registered notice of eviction. The building I had called home for 30 years, every corner, every creaking floorboard, every window that framed the seasons like a painting, was scheduled for demolition in 6 months. I sank onto the small stoop outside my apartment, clutching the letter like it might dissolve if I let go. Everything seemed to shift in that instant. My health, my finances, my security, my family's neglect. A storm raged inside me, and yet, through it all, a small ember of resolve flickered. If the world wouldn't notice my struggle, I would have to carve a way forward myself. Grace arrived shortly after, sensing without question the storm that had overtaken me. She sat beside me, wordless, her presence steady. I rested my head against her shoulder for a moment, the tears finally slipping free. "Linda," she whispered, "you are stronger than you know. This isn't the end. It's just a beginning." I clutched the eviction notice, my mind racing. Surgery, $40,000, a home being taken from me, and my children, absorbed in their lives, blind to the quiet desperation of my existence. The road ahead seemed impossibly steep, but somewhere, beneath the weight of fear, disappointment, and grief, a spark of determination began to glow. I would face this storm, alone if I had to. But I would not be defeated. I remember that afternoon with startling clarity. Portland's sun was gentle, slipping between the clouds in lazy shafts of light that danced on my apartment walls. Yet inside, my world felt anything but gentle. I had spent the morning scrolling through my social media feed, hoping, perhaps naively, for a sign that my family cared. Anything that suggested I was not invisible to them. Instead, my heart sank with every post. Sharon and Derek had just bought a house, a $750,000 house. My chest tightened as I stared at the perfectly staged photos, sparkling floors, a kitchen that glimmered like something out of a magazine, and Derek smiling broadly, holding the keys as Sharon clutched a bottle of champagne. Their excitement radiated through the screen, but where was the thought of me? Not a single message asking how I was doing, how I was feeling, if I even had a home or a heartbeat left unbroken by loneliness. And then Marcus and Vanessa. Oh, Marcus and Vanessa. Their vacation photos appeared next. Turquoise waters, sunlit beaches, their laughter captured in perfect frames. The kind that made me ache with longing. Vanessa leaned against Marcus in a hammock, their faces bright and carefree. Not a single post mentioned me. Not a single word of concern for the mother who had raised him, who had spent decades pouring herself into their lives with little expectation in return. I set my phone down with a tremor running through my hands, a mix of sadness, anger, and disbelief swirling together. The truth had hit me like a physical blow. My children, consumed by their own lives, had no thought for me, no curiosity about how I was surviving, no concern for my health, my home, my very existence. It was then that Bob appeared at my door, his familiar presence a steadying force in the storm. "Sis," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "let me help you with the surgery. I can cover the costs, whatever you need. You don't have to face this alone." I looked at him, and for a brief second, the familiar urge to accept relief and protection washed over me. But pride, stubbornness, and the unspoken lessons of a lifetime refused to bend. I shook my head slowly, my eyes meeting his with quiet determination. "Bob, you've done so much for me already. I won't burden you any further. Not this time." He sighed, frustration mingled with love, but he didn't argue. He knew me too well. He knew that once I set my mind on a path, there was little that could sway me. not even him, my beloved brother. Alone, I sank into my worn armchair, a familiar sense of solitude settling around me like a heavy blanket. My thoughts raced, bouncing from fear to despair, from hopelessness to the faintest glimmer of resolve. I knew I had to act. I had to take control. But what could I possibly do? How could I possibly find the means to save my life when no one around me seemed to notice or care that I needed it? And then, almost as if the universe were offering a hidden lifeline, I remembered. Tom, my beloved Tom, who had passed so many years ago. My heart ached as I pulled open the old box where we kept documents, tax papers, and the few things of sentimental and financial value I had inherited. There, tucked neatly among faded letters and photographs, were 15 certificates, shares of Apple purchased by Tom in 1997. $500 in total. 15 little pieces of paper that, at the time, had been a modest investment, a dream for our future, for our family's future. I stared at them, disbelief mingled with hope. Could it really be possible? Could these little papers hold the key to my salvation? I called Grace immediately, my hands shaking as I spoke. Grace, I found something. Tom, he bought Apple shares. 15 of them, total. $500. My voice wavered, part excitement, part fear. There was a long pause on the other end, then the familiar warmth of her tone, steady and wise. Linda, let me check. Wait, 15 shares? From 1997? Oh my God. Linda, they're worth nearly $3 million today. I sank back into the chair, covering my mouth with trembling hands, tears streaming freely. 3 million? Tom, he always said it was for our retirement, for the family. I never thought it would come to this. The weight of it all, the fear, the betrayal, the neglect, crashed over me in waves. I thought of the surgery, the $40,000 I needed out of pocket. I thought of the eviction notice, the looming demolition of my home. I thought of the children who had barely noticed I existed. And through it all, a quiet, resolute voice in the depths of my being whispered, "You can do this. You have the means. You must act." After long hours of contemplation, I made the decision. 10 shares would be sold, enough to cover my surgery and create a substantial cushion for emergencies. 5 would remain, untouched, a safeguard for whatever life threw at me next. I carefully calculated the figures, a meticulous plan forming in my mind. $2 million in total. Enough not only to save my life, but to finally reclaim a measure of agency over a world that had long ignored me. The moment the transaction was complete, I felt an unfamiliar sense of empowerment, mingled with grief for the life Tom and I had imagined together. Grace sat beside me, her hand on mine, watching quietly. Linda, what are you going to do now? She asked softly. I drew a deep, steadying breath, my gaze distant but focused. I'm going to save myself, Grace. And then, I'm going to make sure they understand what it means to take for granted the person who gave everything to them. It won't be revenge. It will be justice. Careful, measured, with conditions. And I'll start by finding someone who can make sure it's done properly. And so, I did. A week later, I sat across from a seasoned estate attorney in her sleek Portland office, the faint hum of city life filtering through tall windows. She raised an eyebrow as I explained my intentions, the specific conditions I had in mind, my vision for what the gifts would represent. I want to create trusts, I said, my voice calm but resolute. Funds that will benefit my family, but only if they earn them, only if they meet conditions I set. It's time they learn responsibility, respect, and the value of what they've been given. No shortcuts, no entitlement. Everything must be accounted for. Are you able to do this? The attorney regarded me with surprise, a mixture of admiration and caution. Mrs. Morgan, This is unusual, very unusual, but yes, we can structure this. With precision, legally binding conditions, everything you want. I exhaled, the first real exhale in months, and for the first time, a sense of calm settled over me. A storm had begun to turn, and I could feel, deep in my bones, that the next chapter of my life, one of empowerment, dignity, and finally self-respect, was beginning. The morning of my surgery in August arrived with a heaviness I couldn't shake. Portland was quiet, the streets still damp from an early drizzle, and a faint mist hovered over the city like a veil. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee, staring at the envelope I had prepared for Grace. I would need her today, more than ever. The familiar comfort of her presence was a small anchor in what felt like a vast, lonely ocean. I had sent messages to Sharon and Marcus the night before, carefully chosen words that masked the gravity of what lay ahead. "I'll be unavailable for a few days. Minor procedure." That was all. Sharon responded tersely with, "Okay, Mom." Marcus, predictably, didn't respond at all. I felt the familiar sting, the quiet ache of being overlooked, of my existence somehow being negotiable, optional, invisible. But I swallowed it down, pressing a small, polite smile onto my face. Grace would be there, and for now, that was enough. When Grace arrived at the hospital, her eyes met mine, filled with the quiet determination and steadfast support I had come to rely on. She didn't ask if I was nervous. She knew. She simply took my hand and held it, and in that simple gesture I felt a calm strength that no words could convey. The pre-surgery room smelled sharply of antiseptic, the walls sterile and pale. Nurses moved efficiently around us, their voices calm but brisk, their gestures practiced and professional. I lay on the hospital bed, feeling the cold linen against my skin, my heart pounding not just from anticipation, but from the emotional weight I carried. Grace sat beside me, clutching my hand, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to feel the fragility of it all, the vulnerability of trusting my life into the hands of strangers, the uncertainty of tomorrow, and the piercing reality that my own children were absent from my life at a moment when they should have been present. "Your family isn't coming to visit?" a nurse asked softly, noticing my stillness as she prepared my IV line. Her question lingered in the air, a gentle prod toward an uncomfortable truth. I forced a smile, a lie that felt almost instinctive. "They're very busy. It's understandable." Grace's hand tightened around mine, her eyes narrowing. "Linda, stop defending them. They've had every chance to be here. You don't have to cover for their indifference." Her words pierced me, sharp yet liberating. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the truth settle in, the truth I had long avoided confronting. Grace was right. I had spent too many years shielding my family from the consequences of their own neglect, making excuses for them while quietly suffering. Today, I realized, I didn't have to. The surgery itself was a blur of lights, voices, and the hum of machines. When I woke, groggy and fragile, Grace was still there, her presence unwavering. The hours stretched on, slow and contemplative, as I recovered under the quiet supervision of attentive nurses. I had time, plenty of it, to think, to process, to plan. My mind wandered through memories, fears, and the faint embers of a determination that had been quietly growing over the past months. It was during that quiet recovery that Bob called. I could see him walking into my room, his face etched with concern. But as soon as he settled beside me, the weight of his words hit me like a punch. "Linda," he said, voice low, almost reluctant. "I didn't want to tell you this, but you need to know. I overheard Sharon and Derek at a dinner last week. They were talking about you." I felt a chill crawl up my spine, my pulse quickening despite the slow, deliberate pace of post-surgery sedation. "They... what?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper, disbelief mingling with fear. Bob took a deep breath, steadying himself. They said, "When you die, that house of yours will probably be worth around $400,000. Finally, we'll be able to renovate the kitchen and make some real changes." I stared at him, my mind reeling. They said that? Out loud? About me? The words felt like jagged shards, slicing through the thin veil of trust I had foolishly held onto for decades. I felt a strange mix of anger, sorrow, and disillusionment surge through me, the betrayal cutting deeper than I had anticipated. I can't believe it," I whispered, my hands trembling. They said that?" "Yes," Bob confirmed, his voice heavy with a mix of sadness and exasperation. "I didn't want to tell you, but you need to see them for what they really are. You've been carrying so much, and they've been waiting for you to falter." I sank back against the hospital bed, my mind spinning, chest tight with a mix of grief and clarity. The reality was undeniable now. The people I had poured my life into, the children I had raised with love and patience, the family I had trusted implicitly, they had not only neglected me, they had calculated on my absence for their own gain. Grace, sensing the storm inside me, squeezed my hand. "Linda, you see now, don't you? You don't have to suffer in silence. You can take control. You deserve better than this." I exhaled slowly, letting the hospital air fill my lungs, the antiseptic sting mixing with the bitterness and clarity settling in my mind. A plan, faint but growing, began to take shape. It was audacious, yes, radical. But it was mine, and it was fair. It would ensure that those who had overlooked me would finally understand the value of what they had taken for granted. Not just the financial, but the emotional, the moral, the human. By the time I left the hospital, my steps were steady, my spine straighter than it had been in years. The pain of surgery was real, but it was temporary. The empowerment I felt coursing through me was permanent. "Grace," I said, as we walked toward the car, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement. "Call the event planner. Book a venue, decor, catering, everything. We're going to have a Christmas that no one will ever forget." Grace's eyes widened, a mix of awe and excitement dancing across her face. "Linda, you mean it?" I smiled, a firm, determined smile that carried both love and retribution. "I've never been more serious in my life. They will learn, Grace, and if they don't, well, that's on them. But this time, I will be in control, completely." For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt a flicker of hope, tempered with resolve. I had survived surgery alone, yes, but I would not face the rest of my life passively. This was the turning point, the moment where I stopped waiting for them to notice me and started making my presence impossible to ignore. September arrived like a soft whisper of change, the air crisp and fragrant with the promise of new beginnings. After the intensity of surgery and the revelations that had shaken me to my core, I felt a quiet determination building within me. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and the power I had long deferred to others. I began cautiously at first. A personal trainer came into my life, someone patient and encouraging, who helped me regain strength not only in my body, but in my confidence. Each session was a small victory, a push-up completed, a stretch held longer than before, a mile walked without exhaustion. My muscles remembered resilience they had long forgotten, and in turn, my mind began to remember hope. Next came my wardrobe. I had lived for years in comfortable but forgettable clothes, neutral tones that faded into the background of family gatherings and social events. I replaced them with colors that spoke of vitality, elegance, and presence. Deep blues, rich burgundies, and emerald greens, clothes that reflected not only who I was, but who I had always been capable of being. My hair, once merely practical, now received the attention it deserved, professionally cut, styled, and nourished. In the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She was still me, but more assertive, more radiant, more alive. Grace was the first to notice. The day we met for coffee, she blinked, her eyes wide, and exclaimed, "Linda, you're radiant. Honestly, I barely recognize you. This glow, it's remarkable." I laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "Grace, for the first time in years, I'm putting myself first. No apologies, no hesitation, just me." It wasn't vanity, it was necessity. I had spent decades bending, giving, shielding, and sacrificing, and the truth had finally sunk in. If I didn't care for myself, no one else would. This was my renaissance, my reclamation. But transformation isn't just skin deep. I sought out a trusted accountant and my estate attorney to begin structuring the gifts I had envisioned for Christmas. Every detail mattered, every contingency planned. This wasn't about revenge, it was about fairness, accountability, and ensuring the people who had dismissed me understood the value of integrity, effort, and respect. At the same time, I quietly purchased a new apartment, fully furnished, a haven of my own. I didn't tell a soul, not my children, not Sharon, not Marcus. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could exist without expectation, without judgment, where my solitude felt like freedom rather than abandonment. Subtle changes began to ripple through my life. My posture was straighter, my voice firmer, my interactions tinged with a confidence that had been absent for far too long. Friends and acquaintances noticed. Even my family picked up on it. Sharon remarked to Derek one evening, her tone curious but laced with unease, "Mom, she's different. I don't know. More distant, somehow." Derek, ever pragmatic, shrugged. "Better that way. Less drama, more space." His words stung in ways both familiar and foreign. I had always been the caregiver, the constant presence, the one expected to forgive and forget. Now, my distance was a choice, a boundary firmly established and unapologetic. I began attending dance classes, something I had once dreamed of but never pursued. The studio became a sanctuary of laughter, music, and physical expression. I met new people, each encounter a reminder that life continued outside the narrow confines of my family's neglect. I moved with freedom. I smiled without hesitation. I reveled in the joy of being fully seen, by myself, first and foremost, and then by those around me who respected it. Every day, I documented the details of my experiences in a diary. Each unanswered call, each ignored invitation, each small slight from the past became a record, not of bitterness, but of clarity. I wrote about my emotions, my triumphs, and the subtle moments of liberation. This diary was both testament and therapy, a tool to ensure that when the time came, my actions would be deliberate, intentional, and rooted in truth. And then came the call. It startled me in the quiet of my new apartment, the ringtone cutting through the soft hum of the evening. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, my fingers trembling ever so slightly before answering. "Mom," his voice was tense, urgent. "We need to talk about Christmas. Can you lend us $10,000? It's an emergency." I held the phone a moment, listening to the desperation in his tone. In the past, I might have said yes without question. I might have rushed to rescue him again, sacrificing yet another piece of myself in the process. But this time, I paused. I thought of every unanswered call, every neglectful gesture, every moment I had carried silently while they lived their lives without regard. A calm, controlled voice emerged, firm yet measured. "Marcus, we'll talk at Christmas. Until then, let's wait and see. There's time." I hung up, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. The decision wasn't cruel. It was necessary. It was the boundary I had long refused to draw. And in that boundary, I discovered an unshakable strength, a clarity of purpose that no disappointment, no neglect, no betrayal could diminish. I leaned back in my chair, gazing out the window at the Portland skyline, the autumn leaves drifting gently in the breeze. Life had changed in ways I had only begun to understand. I had transformed not just in appearance, but in essence. I had found the courage to place myself first, to honor my needs, and to reclaim the dignity that had long been taken for granted. And as the city lights began to shimmer against the dusk, I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. The Christmas I was planning, the one they would never forget, was just the beginning. I had finally stepped into my own power, and nothing would ever make me shrink again. December arrived with the sharp scent of pine and the soft hum of festive anticipation. But for me, it was not just another holiday season. It was the moment I had meticulously prepared for, a culmination of months of planning, reflection, and transformation. The city streets glittered with holiday lights, and the faint sounds of carols drifted through the air as I stepped into my attorney's office. Every detail of this meeting mattered. Every signature, every clause was a carefully considered step toward accountability and truth. Grace accompanied me, her presence steady, supportive, yet tinged with excitement. She had seen the transformation unfold from the earliest moments. My recovery, my reclamation of self, my quiet determination to ensure that the family who had overlooked me would finally understand the value of integrity and effort. Today, she would witness the final act, the fruits of my patient, deliberate planning. My attorney, Mr. Caldwell, looked up from the stack of documents I had placed before him. His brow furrowed as he adjusted his glasses, a hint of hesitation in his eyes. "Mrs. Morgan, are you absolutely certain about this arrangement? It's highly unusual." I met his gaze, calm but firm, every inch the woman who had endured surgery alone, endured betrayal, endured years of neglect. "Absolutely," I said, my voice steady, resolute. "They need to learn. They need to understand that actions have consequences, and that privilege without accountability is not an entitlement." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly, recognizing that my decision was not impulsive but deliberate, thoughtful, and above all, irrevocable. With careful hands, he began finalizing the documents, outlining each gift, each condition, and each expectation with the precision of someone accustomed to navigating complex legal structures. The first certificate was for Sharon, my eldest. $300,000 in a trust fund, substantial but not without accountability. The condition was clear. She must commit to 200 hours of work at a homeless shelter over the next year. It was a challenge that demanded empathy, humility, and genuine effort, qualities I feared she had long neglected in favor of convenience and comfort. Next came Marcus, my son, whose laughter and charm often masked his neglect. His certificate, also $300,000, came with a condition that struck close to the heart. He would need to reconcile his relationship with his mother, me, and demonstrate commitment through weekly visits for an entire year. It was not merely financial, it was an invitation to rebuild what he had allowed to crumble through distraction and indifference. Derek and Vanessa, the son-in-law and daughter-in-law who had so often dismissed my presence, received $50,000 each. But it would not come freely. Each would need to write a sincere letter of apology, acknowledging past wrongs, and engage in meaningful volunteer work. Accountability, reflection, and service, perhaps lessons they had never truly learned. Then there was Bob, my steadfast brother, who had been present through every twist and trial. $500,000 without conditions, a recognition of unwavering loyalty and support. His presence had been my anchor, and he deserved acknowledgement without the encumbrances required for the others. I paused, letting the weight of these decisions settle in the room. Grace leaned closer, curiosity and concern mixing in her gaze. "Linda, and the other envelopes?" she asked softly. "What's inside those?" I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that held the complexity of months of observation, planning, and revelation. "The truth," I said simply. "All of it. Every lie, every secret, every choice they made, or failed to make that shaped how they treated me. They'll see themselves reflected back in full. Nothing will be hidden. Grace's eyes widened, understanding both the audacity and the justice of it. You're really doing this? I am, I replied, feeling a surge of empowerment. This was not vengeance, it was reclamation. It was the manifestation of boundaries, accountability, and dignity. For the first time, I was orchestrating events not around the whims of my family, but around the principles I had long wished they understood. As the documents were finalized and signed, I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Each line, each clause, each envelope was a reflection not only of their responsibilities, but of my own growth. I had survived surgery, betrayal, and neglect, and now I was the architect of the consequences they would face, not out of malice, but out of clarity, fairness, and love, for myself and, in some ways, for them, if they were willing to learn. The final touch was personal. I prepared a second envelope for each recipient, identical in size, but secretive in content. These were not for wealth or obligation, but for revelation. They contained documentation of truths, private observations, and the hidden realities they had overlooked or ignored. They were designed to challenge, to confront, and, if possible, to awaken. The day faded into evening, and I returned home to my new apartment, a space that was mine entirely, untouched by judgment or expectation. I carefully placed the envelopes in a secure location, my mind turning over the anticipation of the upcoming Christmas. This would not be a typical holiday. It would be a reckoning, a moment that would etch lessons into the hearts of those who had long underestimated me. Then the phone rang. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized Sharon's number. I answered, maintaining a calm voice, careful not to reveal the smallest hint of my preparations or my new life. "Mom," she said, her tone casual, almost oblivious. "You're coming over tomorrow, right? Should I pick you up? Your place is so far." I froze, a small smile tugging at my lips. She has no idea I moved 2 months ago, I thought. She assumed the familiar, the predictable, the controllable. Little did she know that the woman she thought she understood had become a force beyond her anticipation. "Of course, Sharon," I replied smoothly. "We'll see each other tomorrow." As I hung up, I felt the quiet thrill of anticipation, a mixture of calm power and subtle triumph. They believed they knew the rhythm of my life, the limits of my patience, and the scope of my influence. Tomorrow, they would learn how little they truly understood. I sank into my chair, sipping tea, watching the December sun cast golden streaks across the city. The stage was set, the pieces in motion, and the consequences of their neglect would unfold in ways they could no longer control. For the first time, I felt entirely unshakable. I had transformed not only in spirit and body, but in strategy and vision. The gifts were prepared, the envelopes sealed, and when the curtain rose on Christmas, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning sunlight spilled through the living room windows of Sharon's house, bouncing off the ornaments on the Christmas tree and casting a warm glow over the room. From the moment I stepped inside, the air felt charged with expectation. But now I saw it for what it truly was, a mix of skepticism, amusement, and the subtle undercurrent of condescension I had endured my entire life. I had carefully orchestrated this moment for months, yet I couldn't ignore the familiar pangs of nervousness. I held the envelopes in my hands, smooth, plain, unassuming, deceptive in their simplicity. Each one contained far more than the family suspected. Every eye in the room was on me as I placed the first envelope in front of Sharon. She tore it open with exaggerated impatience, her fingers trembling with excitement. And then laughter, sharp, piercing, dismissive, filled the room. "Mom," she sneered, her voice dripping with derision. "This is serious? A printed certificate?" "You can't even give a proper present," Derek chuckled, leaning back with a smug grin. "Looks like another internet scam, Bob. Didn't you try to warn her?" He cast a pointed glance at my brother, as if to imply I had once again fallen for something ridiculous. Marcus shook his head, eyebrows knit, a shadow of disappointment passing over his face. "Mom, we told you not to worry about gifts this year, but if you were going to give something, it could at least be practical, something real." Vanessa, ever the social media enthusiast, whispered to Marcus, and they both laughed quietly, snapping photos of the certificate. "This is going to make hilarious stories," Vanessa muttered, her phone already raised in preparation. I sat quietly, allowing their words and laughter to wash over me. Each sarcastic smile, each glance of pity, each whispered joke, they were all familiar to me, yet this time, I observed without fear, without shame. I let the discomfort sit, let the sting land, because I knew the truth lay beneath these ordinary pieces of paper. Bob, my brother, finally spoke, his voice firm, tinged with quiet exasperation. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, eyes flicking toward Sharon and Derek. "Uncle Bob," Sharon interrupted, her tone sharp, mocking. "With all due respect, Mom could have chosen better gifts. We gave her real presents, after all." I stood, calm, composed, the weight of the moment settling onto my shoulders like armor. "Keep those papers," I said softly, deliberately. "You'll want them soon enough." The room fell silent for a fraction of a second, a quiet that held potential for revelation. And then, as if the air itself waited for my next words, I began to speak, my voice carrying authority and quiet power. "This is not a scam," I said slowly, allowing each word to find its mark. "These are trust funds. You have access to significant sums if you meet the conditions I set forth." Sharon's laughter faltered, replaced by confusion, disbelief. "Mom, stop. You don't have money for trust funds." A small smile tugged at the corners of my lips as I reached into my bag. Slowly, deliberately, I withdrew several banking statements, each page crisp, each line a testament to years of careful planning and quiet resolve. I spread them across the coffee table, letting the numbers speak louder than any argument. "I sold the Apple shares that Dad left us," I said, voice steady, measured. "Shares that would have been worth $3 million to this family. I used $2 million of that sum to secure my health, to save my life, and to create these funds for each of you." The room froze. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. Sharon's face went pale, her jaw slack, eyes wide. What did you just say?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "You heard me. I made this decision when I needed heart surgery, and none of you returned my calls. None of you came to my aid when I was vulnerable. I did this for my survival, for my dignity, and now for accountability." Marcus opened his mouth, startled laughter escaping him. "Mom, stop. You don't have money for trust funds." I turned toward him, my expression calm but unwavering. "These are real, Marcus. You can see the documentation. I'm not bluffing. You all have a choice. Follow the conditions and claim the funds, or ignore them and learn the consequences of indifference." Derek leaned forward suddenly, snatching the certificate from Sharon's hands, his face a mixture of disbelief and greed. "Wait, so this is real? How much is in here?" I stood fully, allowing the presence of authority and truth to fill the room. "Read the conditions," I said, "and understand this. If you fail to meet them, the money remains untouched. And remember, these conditions are more than financial. They are lessons. Lessons about empathy, respect, and responsibility. We will reconvene at the New Year's party, but only those who honor these requirements may attend." A heavy silence descended. No one spoke. The weight of realization hung thickly in the air. They could no longer dismiss, ignore, or ridicule me. The carefully constructed facade of control and superiority they had maintained for years had shattered, replaced with the undeniable evidence of my preparation, my foresight, and my unwavering resolve. I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction, a subtle nod to the years of endurance, the months of meticulous planning, the personal growth that had carried me to this point. For the first time in a long time, I was not reacting to them. I was leading, guiding, and setting the terms for accountability and truth. The room was still, the hum of the Christmas tree lights a soft undertone beneath the tension. I felt a surge of clarity and power, a knowing that the landscape of our family dynamics had irrevocably shifted. This Christmas, they would learn the weight of their actions, and I would stand, fully present, fully dignified, and entirely unafraid. The days following Christmas were a blur of ringing phones, messages, and the constant ping of notifications. My new apartment, which had become my sanctuary, felt suddenly invaded by the persistent reminders of a family that had underestimated me for decades. Each call was a mixture of curiosity, desperation, and in some cases, indignation. I answered selectively, my voice calm, almost detached, letting them feel the distance I had carefully cultivated. Sharon's voice was the first to pierce the fragile calm. She was frantic, sharp with barely contained irritation. "Mom, why haven't you answered? I stopped by your place today. Your old place." I tilted my head slightly, as if pondering the absurdity of her assumption. "Oh, Sharon," I said evenly. "Did I ever mention I moved 2 months ago?" There was a pause, heavy with disbelief. You moved?" she stammered, the words catching in her throat. Why didn't anyone tell us?" My tone turned colder, sharper, precise. "I called about the surgery, Sharon, or were you too busy to return my messages?" She didn't have a response. Silence swallowed her words, and for a moment I felt no need to fill it. Marcus was next. He appeared at my door unannounced a day later, his expression a mixture of worry, guilt, and confusion. "Mom!" he exclaimed, stepping inside as if he had all the right to invade my space. "Why didn't you tell us you moved? How could you?" I raised an eyebrow, letting the weight of reality settle in the room. "I told you about the surgery, Marcus, or were you too busy to notice?" He faltered, words catching on his tongue. I didn't need him to answer. His silence spoke volumes. Years of neglect, of assumptions, of taking for granted that I would always be there, were now mirrored in his hesitance. Meanwhile, Vanessa had taken to social media, the modern megaphone for judgment and ridicule. I scrolled casually one evening and saw her post. "When you discover you could have been rich, but your mother-in-law is crazy," accompanied by a laugh-crying emoji and a picture she had taken of one of the trust fund certificates. Bob's call came immediately after I saw it. "Linda!" His voice was tight, almost shaking with anger. "I saw Vanessa's post. Should I take legal action for you?" I laughed softly, a sound without humor but full of calm amusement. "No, Bob. Let them dig their own holes. Their arrogance is burying them just fine." The next day, Derek tried his hand at negotiation. He arrived at my door, tie slightly askew, eyes cautiously hopeful. "Linda, can we start over? The conditions you set, they're extreme. Absurd, even." I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms, letting my presence fill the room. "Absurd are daughters who plan renovations on the inheritance of a living mother," I replied evenly, each word measured. "The rest is merely the reflection of choices made." Derek's face paled slightly. He opened his mouth, trying to form a retort, but I anticipated it. "How did you—" he began, voice faltering. "Bob told me everything," I said calmly. "Every conversation you thought I wouldn't hear. Every plan you thought I wouldn't know." Sharon burst into the room shortly after, pointing at Bob with wide eyes, trembling with betrayal. "You told her? You traitor!" Bob's expression remained firm, unwavering. "Traitor?" he said, his voice low but firm. "You expected the woman to die for money? This is accountability, not betrayal." The room seemed to shrink under the weight of truths being revealed. Each of them was forced to confront the reality of their actions, or inactions, and the consequences that had followed. They had assumed that disregard, distraction, and arrogance would shield them from responsibility. They had been wrong. I returned to my desk, picking up the envelopes I had prepared so meticulously. My hands were steady, confident, deliberate. I had no intention of being intimidated, guilted, or manipulated. This was my life, my space, my rules, and I was ready to see who could respect that. Another letter arrived that evening, slipped under my door with no return address. I opened it slowly, feeling the familiar mix of intrigue and caution. The note was brief, elegant in its handwriting, yet the words carried weight. You do not know everything. Meet me at the Riverside Cafe. A friend. I read the message twice, my mind racing. Who could this be? Who possessed knowledge beyond what even Bob had shared? And what secrets were still hidden, waiting to surface? I folded the letter carefully, placing it in my handbag, a quiet thrill running through me. The storm of my family's arrogance had only just begun to clear, revealing hidden truths, the depth of deception, and perhaps the possibility of justice and reconciliation, but only for those willing to confront themselves. I sank into my chair, letting the tension fade into resolve. Christmas had ended, but the repercussions had only begun. My family's illusions were shattered, and in that chaos, I found clarity. For the first time, I saw not just the fractures in our relationships, but the power I wielded to demand accountability, the right to define the terms of engagement, and the freedom to protect my dignity, my health, and my peace. The Riverside Cafe awaited, a meeting shrouded in secrecy and the promise of revelation. Whoever this mysterious friend was, I knew they held pieces of a puzzle that could shift everything I thought I knew. And I was ready. This was not just family drama. This was a reckoning, and I was determined to face it head-on, fully prepared, fully alive, and unafraid of what truths might come next. The Riverside Hotel ballroom gleamed under the chandeliers, a dazzling display of light bouncing off polished marble floors and sparkling gold accents. The air buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the faint clink of champagne glasses. I paused at the entrance, taking in the scene, the culmination of months of planning, transformation, and silent preparation. Tonight, every detail mattered. I stepped into the room, the long red gown hugging my frame with elegance and poise. My hair was perfectly styled, a cascade of glossy waves that caught the light with every movement. The subtle shimmer of my jewelry reflected the chandeliers above. Grace stood beside me, her eyes wide, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "You look magnificent, Linda," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly with pride. I nodded, feeling a surge of quiet power and satisfaction. "For the first time in years, I'm doing this for me," I replied, scanning the room. Friends, neighbors, colleagues, distant relatives, all gathered, unaware of the storm about to unfold. The party was in full swing when Sharon, Marcus, and their spouses arrived, faces carefully painted with forced smiles, apologies dripping from their every gesture. I greeted them politely, maintaining an almost imperceptible distance, letting the tension settle between us like a heavy curtain. The music faded as I made my way to the stage. I held the microphone lightly, my posture confident, voice steady. "Thank you all for coming," I began, the murmurs of the crowd quieting. "I want to share something important tonight." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the audience, landing on Sharon and Marcus, whose faces betrayed a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. "This past year has been a journey," I continued, "one that challenged me, isolated me, and ultimately strengthened me. I faced a serious heart condition, a surgery that no one in my family responded to, and months of recovery that were often painfully solitary." The room shifted, the weight of my words beginning to settle. Whispers rippled through the crowd, but I pressed on, recounting the conversations I had overheard, the cold words, the self-interest, the callous disregard. I realized I needed to take matters into my own hands to protect my dignity, my health, and my future. And then, the third, brutal twist. I raised my hand, holding the second set of envelopes high. "These," I said, voice resonant, "are not just financial gifts. They represent 6 months of careful observation and documentation." I clicked the remote, and the large screen behind me flickered to life. The first image appeared. Derek with a woman not his spouse, a moment of indiscretion captured with undeniable clarity. Gasps filled the room. Derek's jaw tightened, eyes darting nervously. The next images followed. Vanessa transferring money from Marcus's company account into her own. Sharon flaunting extravagant purchases, claiming financial hardship while spending thousands each month on luxuries. The crowd's murmur turned to a stunned silence. "You had no right," Sharon shouted, voice breaking with fury and disbelief. I held my gaze, unwavering, voice firm, unflinching. "No right? You wanted my death to gain access to wealth. You gambled with my life for material gain." Marcus fell to his knees, shame and regret flooding his features. "Mom, I didn't know about Vanessa. I'm so sorry." I allowed a moment of silence, letting the weight of accountability settle on each of them. Then I delivered the final revelation. The remaining 5 Apple shares, worth $1 million, will go to charity and to Bob, the man who has always been present and steadfast. You will receive what I offered at Christmas under my conditions, or nothing at all. Sharon's lips quivered, a mixture of shock and disbelief frozen across her face. Derek's expression was pale, eyes wide, a man confronted by truths he could neither deny nor manipulate. The room was hushed, the energy taut with revelation, reflection, and the rawness of human fallibility. Every guest felt the tension, some whispering, some simply staring, unable to process the scale of what had just unfolded. And then another ripple in the calm. A woman approached, elegant, poised, with a notepad in hand and a reporter's intensity in her gaze. "Mrs. Morgan?" she asked, voice steady but full of purpose. "I'm Julia Chen, from the Portland Tribune. Your story, everything you've done, needs to be told. May I interview you?" I looked at her for a long moment, weighing the enormity of the night, the vindication, the exposure, and the lessons laid bare. Then I smiled, a quiet, satisfied smile that carried years of struggle, resilience, and reclamation. "Yes," I said, with quiet authority. "My story deserves to be told." The ballroom seemed to exhale, as if the universe itself had shifted. What had begun as a night of celebration became a testament to courage, justice, and the unyielding power of self-respect. Tonight was more than a party. It was the reclaiming of a life, the assertion of dignity, and the undeniable declaration that true wealth lies not just in money, but in standing tall, unapologetically, against betrayal and neglect. I glanced at Grace, her eyes glimmering with pride and admiration. I thought of Bob, the steadfast anchor in a sea of chaos. And I realized that this was the culmination not only of my strategic planning, but of a deeper, more profound truth. A woman who claims her life, her choices, and her worth is unstoppable. And with that thought, I stepped off the stage, ready to meet the consequences, the apologies, and the transformations yet to come. The night was far from over, but for the first time, I stood fully in my power, radiant, unshakable, and completely free. 3 months had passed since that unforgettable New Year's Eve at the Riverside Hotel. The winter had melted into early March, and Portland had begun to bloom again. I was sitting at a small table in my favorite cafe, the aroma of fresh coffee mingling with the soft chatter of strangers. The city felt different now, somehow lighter, freer, as if the weight of past betrayals had lifted. The news of my story, How I had turned a $2 million inheritance into life-changing lessons for my family had gone viral nationally. Headlines proclaimed, "Mother teaches family, a lesson about respect and legacy with $2 million inheritance." The world had watched my journey, the surgery, the silence, the humiliation, the calculated generosity, and the revelations that shook my family to their cores. People called, emailed, and sent messages from across the country, offering words of support, admiration, and curiosity. I had become, unexpectedly, a symbol of dignity and courage, a woman who refused to be diminished, who refused to allow the selfishness of others to dictate the terms of her life. Marcus was the first to reach out in a genuine way. Unlike Sharon and Derek, whose apologies had been either absent or legally threatened, Marcus accepted the conditions I had laid out at Christmas. Week by week, he visited, gradually proving his commitment, not for the money, not for appearances, but because he genuinely wanted to reconnect and rebuild what had been damaged. Over time, he even filed for divorce from Vanessa, the toxic influence that had compounded his distance from both his mother and his own moral compass. Sharon, of course, did not accept responsibility gracefully. She attempted to sue me, challenging the legal structure of the trusts, questioning my authority and intentions. But the funds had been carefully arranged, professionally, ethically, and legally. Her efforts failed, and with the exposure of Derek's affair, their marriage crumbled under public scrutiny. I watched it all with a detached calm, understanding that justice often comes quietly and indirectly, not always through confrontation, but through truth. I found myself sitting for a televised interview, lights warm against my skin, the studio buzzing with anticipation. The interviewer's voice was gentle but probing. "Linda, some say your actions were ruthless. What do you say to that?" I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "I didn't do this for revenge," I said, eyes unwavering. "I did it for respect, self-respect. For years I allowed neglect, disregard, and even betrayal to define my life. I refused to let it continue. And yes, the lessons were hard, but sometimes clarity comes through decisiveness." The cameras captured my expression, calm but resolute, my hands resting lightly on the table. Across the country, viewers saw a woman who had endured, reflected, and acted with intention. I felt the shift within myself, the empowerment that comes when you choose your dignity over approval, your values over convenience. 6 months later, spring had fully arrived. Grace and I met once more at our cafe ritual, a comforting haven for honest conversation and unguarded emotions. "How are you really?" Grace asked, studying me with her perceptive gaze. I smiled, the first genuine, unburdened smile in years. Free, for the first time in decades. Completely free. At that moment, Marcus appeared, a small bouquet of wildflowers in hand, the soft scent of spring blossoms filling the space between us. "Mom," he said, voice tentative yet filled with earnestness, "I've completed the 50 visits, as promised. But can I keep coming? Because I want to. Not because of money, not because of guilt, but because I truly want to be here." Tears welled in my eyes, and I rose to embrace him. The warmth of his arms reminded me of the potential for genuine connection, the fruit of patience, trust, and second chances. "It's all I ever wanted, Marcus," I whispered, feeling the tears slide freely down my cheeks, unashamed. A week later, a letter arrived from Sharon, written in her careful, elegant hand. "Mom," it read, "I don't expect forgiveness. But I have started volunteering, not for the money, but because you were right. I needed to change." Even in her limited recognition, I saw the faintest glimmer of growth, a seed planted, however stubborn. In my new apartment, filled with sunlight and memories, I decorated carefully, placing photographs of family, travels, and milestones. I had finally created a sanctuary, a reflection of who I had become, independent, valued, and in charge of my own narrative. Bob joined me for Thanksgiving that year, Marcus and his children in tow, laughter echoing through the rooms. A new tradition emerged. Each person shared something they were genuinely grateful for. Marcus's voice, tender yet strong, resonated in the warm air. I'm grateful for the mother who never gave up on me, even when I didn't deserve it. I looked out the window, holding a photograph of Tom, the love of my life and the architect of a legacy that extended far beyond financial wealth. Thank you, I murmured, for teaching us about planning, about love, and about understanding our own worth. Grace raised her glass, a radiant smile lighting her face, to Linda, the woman who chose herself. I lifted my own glass, a quiet, resolute smile on my lips. In that moment, I understood fully. I had saved the entire year, not just for material gifts, but for the preservation of my dignity, my voice, and my soul. The most priceless gift I ever gave was to myself, and nothing, no betrayal, no neglect, no societal expectation could ever take that away. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the apartment, I opened a small envelope that had arrived earlier that day. Inside was an invitation to speak at a national conference on empowerment in later life. A spark ignited within me, a thrill of possibility and purpose. I read the words carefully, smiled, and whispered, yes. Absolutely, yes. The journey had been long, painful, and transformative. I was no longer just a mother, a sister, or a widow. I was a woman fully alive, fully seen, fully in control of her destiny. And now, the world would hear my story too. If you followed my journey, learned with me, and felt every twist and turn, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's so much more to explore about resilience, empowerment, and the lessons life teaches us when we choose ourselves.